Good evening, and welcome to our Pitt in Partnership Leading and Getting Involved. My name is Nicole Parks, and I am the current president of the African American Alumni Council. We welcome you to this event as we are celebrating the Martin Luther King Day of Service, and we wanted to bring attention to Pitt's partnerships in different communities. We know that to bring justice, love, and friendship, we must build stronger communities. We must work in shaping our culture and community, and we build this through community support. So tonight, we're going to discuss and see how Pitt is working in our community. I would like to introduce our moderator this evening. Our moderator this evening is Valerie Njai. She is the current president of the Pitt Alumni Association, an active member of the Pitt Alumni Association since 2010. Val Njai has provided vital leadership within the African American Alumni Council. In 2015, she was awarded the PAA Volunteer Excellence Award, and she received the African American Alumni Council's Blue, Gold, Black Colors of Celebration Leadership Award. We want to thank the Alumni Association and the University of Pittsburgh for helping us to produce this event. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. We are so excited to have this program this evening. Typically, AAAC affiliates all over the country would be planning on doing service. Here in Pittsburgh, we generally work with the various schools. We've gone out to communities like Braddock to provide service. And then we've even had programs on campus to bring people back to celebrate our 50th anniversaries. So we're glad you're here with us this evening. Community service is something that is very, very important, not just to me, but I think most of the individuals who are in the African American Alumni Council. So it's a natural that we provide service on this day, on the day that we're paying tribute to Martin Luther King Day, but also at other times. So I just want to go over the webinar format and talk to you and introduce to you the individuals who are participating in our program tonight. Now, we're going to hear from three amazing panelists representing various areas of Pitt. We'll have a facilitated discussion with time for audience questions at the end. Guests can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of their screens to submit a question anytime throughout the discussion. We'll cover the questions at the end. So now we're going to introduce our panelists. We'll begin with Dr. Lena Destilio, who serves as Associate Vice Chancellor for Community Engagement in Pitt's Office of Community and Governmental Relations. We have Morgan Overton, two-time Pitt alumna of the Diedrich School of Arts and Sciences and School of Social Work, who serves as a Community Engagement and Policy Associate with the maternal health team at the Jewish Healthcare Foundation, and who serves as a commissioner for the City of Pittsburgh's Gender and Equity Commission. And our third panelist is Dr. Belkis Torres, who serves as the Executive Director of Global Engagement for Pitt's University Center for International Studies. So we're going to begin with our questions. And so we're going to hear from all three panelists. And We have a lot of questions that we want to ask them this evening, and we're very fortunate that the panelists will have materials that will be available to you, and I'm certain that you'll be able to get to them even after this 1 hour. So let's begin with, how would you define community engagement, and how does it relate to your work? Now I'm going to ask all three of you, and let's begin with you, Dr. Therese.
Thank you, Valerie. You know, the University of Pittsburgh for many years, but most recently under the leadership of Dr. Destilio, has done a really fantastic job of defining community engagement as a process whereby experts, be it faculty or expert practitioners, as well as students, are in a mutual and reciprocal relationship with partners at the local level, at the national level, and at the international level. Community engagement for Pitt then is based on a relationship that takes time, energy, mutual respect, but more importantly, a shared vision and a mission for what we'd like the future to look like together. And then that relationship turns into a very deep and considerate conversations about how we all come into partnership, leveraging our expertise and our resources to advance a mutually identified long-term goal.
Okay, thank you. Morgan, how would you define community engagement?
Thank you, Val. Thank you for having me on this panel. So when I first hear community engagement, my gut reaction is, really centering the lived experiences and the voices of that community first and foremost. And I think that, one mistake that's easy to be made is that we think that we're going to just go into a community to save it. But the truth is, communities are already engaged. It's just about being intentional to build trust, to learn and to listen about how members of that community define themselves, because we need to realize that communities aren't monolithic. And then identify what their needs are, what resources they already possess. So it goes into what Belkis was saying. We have to make it a bi-directional relationship and honor what talent and innovation already exists there. So that's kind of the homework that I do and I encourage people to do before they engage in community engagement, because it's a really transformative process.
Thank you. Dr. Destilio, how would you describe community engagement?
Well, I think Belkis and Morgan have done a fantastic job. And the only other thing that I might add is this. There have been a number of people that talk about language is so important, but it really does depict our meaning, right? How we talk about things really gives everybody an insight into what exactly it is that we mean. So there is incredible power in the small words. So I want you to think with me about this. I'm going to give you a couple words. In, to, on, for, and with. We can do lots of stuff in communities. Lots of stuff is done to communities. Unfortunately, plenty of stuff has happened on top of communities, right? But when we're with community, with each other, right? And that means being in the struggle of the relationship, but really valuing each other's gifts, and we work together. That's what I think engagement is.
Thank you. So why is it important for Pitt as an institution to be involved in its various communities? We'll begin with you, Dr. Destilio.
Sure. Well, here's a couple things about this. For a higher education institution, any higher ed, private, public, doesn't matter. Knowledge is a public good, right? The production of knowledge is something that's good for everybody, and that is a public good that everybody should be able to tap into. But at Pitt, we have a particularly specialized attachment to that. We are a state-related institution. We have a civic mandate as a state-related institution. We are an urban serving institution. So we are particularly committed and dedicated to this place that we are a part of because of the civic mission that we have. The other component of that is our future is inextricably linked to the communities of which we are a part. We have to care deeply about how all of us are doing because it deeply affects this institution. It affects every one of our graduates. It affects our students, our faculty, our staff. And so that's really powerful for me to keep that in the forefront of everybody's minds and say, listen, not only is it our civic responsibility, it's also just a good practice for who we want to be in the world.
Belkis, do you want to add to that?
Absolutely. I think the only thing to add really is to say that community isn't just the geographic space that we can walk to or drive through. That in fact, when we think about our community, it's international, it's global, it's the entire world, right? What happens, unfortunately, we learned this very viscerally in 2020 and are still suffering the effects in 21. What happens in one part of the world affects the entire planet. And so it's incredibly important for a university like Pitt, where we are producing knowledge and where that knowledge needs to be accessible and equitable to all, that we are not only producing knowledge, but that we are leveraging our partnerships and our engagement around the world to learn from other researchers, to learn from other practitioners and students, to understand how particular challenges are met in other contexts and might be applicable to ours, right? So this idea of knowledge that Dr. Dastilio is referencing is super important because when we engage with communities, we're not only in service and in relationship with that community, but many times we are always learning from that relationship and from that community as well.
Morgan, do you want to add why you feel it's important for the university to be engaged in communities?
Wow, how much time we got? Pitt sits in a community, right? And so it only makes sense for it to do its due diligence and pour its resources out into the community. As a native Pittsburgher, and anybody who's here can see that we have so many resources here in this city. We have, research, we have innovation, we have philanthropy, we have just so much that we can offer, but it has to be to the benefit of the people who are indigenous to what makes Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh, right? It only makes sense, honestly, it's common sense to me. But as Lena said, we haven't seen beneficial instances throughout history. So it's up to us to really take this window of opportunity, use what we've learned from history and do right by it.
Okay, so Belkis, what is Pitt doing, in the realm of community engagement on a local, national, and international level?
So this is where we could go on for hours because there's so much and it is so rich. But I would tell you that it's interesting to look at it in terms of certain categories, and I can provide some examples. I think Lena can provide many, many more, and I encourage her to do so. Pitt does a lot in terms of community engagement in the pursuit of knowledge, as she said, in the realm of research. Right. So we are, of course, a Research One institution. So when we talk about community engagement, a lot of times our mind goes to service or volunteer opportunities, which is a sort of second branch of what Pitt does in terms of community engagement. But there's a breadth and a depth of projects right now that are informed by our researchers and are in collaboration with partners around the world. One of my favorites, because it brings so many minds and projects together, is a project called The Business of Humanity at the University of Pittsburgh that brings together experts from the School of Business, experts from the Swanson School of Engineering, experts from social work in Pittsburgh, and then connects them with experts locally here in the Homewood area, as well as experts in cities across India. And so it's a fantastic project because it has both local and global implications and ramifications. And the project itself has many, many different aspects to it, but at the root level, what the project is meant to do is to look at, as Morgan is saying, the needs of particular communities that may not be resource rich, and bring the research in service of providing alternative modes of bringing those resources to those communities. In particular, the research is focusing on DC power and how to bring potential energy saving approaches to different communities, how to bring concepts of sustainability to greenhouses and to building green characteristics in particular communities and villages, both here in the United States and in India. And then also spurring economic development and job growth as these projects come to fruition. And so it's been a project that has been funded locally from foundations here in Pittsburgh, as well as nationally and internationally by foundations in India and government entities there as well. It's been a project that's been around for many, many years, but it's one that continues to grow and evolve, and as the needs of the community grow and evolve, the project meets them where they are. And so it's one of many, many fascinating projects where engagement with community is based on and a mutual understanding and research expertise to meet a real world challenge head on, which is really fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. And so, Lena, do you want to add anything to that?
You know, I think that was such a great example, Belkis. You know, when I think about the work that's happening in the Homewood neighborhood, certainly the bioshelter is a huge part of that. The Manufacturing Assistance Center that's located there has been a tremendous move for the university. So about 3 years ago, we relocated the Manufacturing Assistance Center from a suburb of Pittsburgh into the heart of Homewood. And really what that exists to do is to train workers, the workforce, into manufacturing opportunities. So all different kinds of computer-aided manufacturing. Students, whatever their ages, right? Whether they're high schoolers in career and technical education through Pittsburgh Public, all the way to and through your working years, can go to the MAC, get trained in a 6-week course. We have a 95% job placement rate. Students come out making $18 to $20 an hour. Now, what's so great about this is about 45% of the students come from within the city limits. Of our students, about 31% have been previously incarcerated. So this is a real disruption in sort of economic opportunities. So we have the MAC in Homewood, and then of course we have the Community Engagement Center in Homewood. And the CEC, many of you know, you joined us for our grand opening in 2018. If you haven't yet been to the CEC, coming out. And I have to tell you, we are open during the pandemic. So we first host community learning hubs at the CEC,
That's right.
but all 16 schools at the university have been involved. Tremendous amounts of work with partners in Homewood, working on Homewood-based agendas, mutually beneficial work across teaching, research, service. It's been tremendous. And our director there, Darren Ellerby, she's a phenomenal leader. She has led so much trust building. She's led so much great platform building work to make sure that everybody that walks through those doors feels honored and recognized and really can find the right partnership for them. So much has been happening, and I've been delighted to see where we've been able to take those kind of place-based, deep sort of commitments.
Well, thank you. I was going to ask you about the Engagement Center. It's a beautiful building, and the community is really using it. I know even AAAC, we've gone there for different events. So tell us about the other. Somebody, can you tell us about the Hill District Engagement Center? I know that they don't have a facility yet, but I hear they hit the ground running.
Well, that is absolutely right. You know, and I would highly recommend that you check out the site. I think Belkis put that into the chat for everybody, cec.pitt.edu. So our director of the Hill District site is a gentleman by the name of Kirk Holbrook. He spent the last 20 years of his life living and serving in the Hill District. And so he has been tremendous in knitting together a whole array of partnerships, even as he was in his temporary home at the Bedford Hope Center. His offices now are located at the Blakey Program Building, 1908 Wiley Avenue. We'll be there for a couple of years. And then I'm very excited to share with everybody our permanent home for the CEC in the Hill is going to be part of the new Granada Theater. The Hill Community Development Corporation had weather secured and taken ownership of the New Granada many years ago, and it's going to be a landmark community development in the Hill, and we are so pleased to be a part of that. And the theme of the CEC in the Hill really has been the epicenter of STEAM. So it is a digital inclusion center. That means it provides all manner of digital literacy programming and computer access and training, STEM, and the arts. So we have an iteration of our African American Center for Poetry and Poetics that will be located there. Jazz Studies will have its jazz studio there. We're of course going to have education and social work and all of the other schools, but really STEAM is the heart of that center.
Well, I saw a rendering of the building this week, and I am so excited. I remember in 1968 when I was at Pitt, and that building had, was affected by the riots in 68, but we used to tutor men for GEDs. And I don't think much has happened with the building. I mean, over the years, so often, this project, that project. So I'm really looking forward to when that is completed and we move in there.
Oh, it's going to be great.
So how can individuals get involved in their communities in a virtual world? I'd like to ask all of you that. And let's begin with Morgan.
Yeah, I get this question every day almost. Morgan, how do I get involved? How do I get engaged? And I got it pretty much all the time last year, as you can imagine, with the racial justice demonstrations that have happened. And Belka said this earlier, but community engagement is so vast, and so what I tell people is to kind of look at yourself first. What issue exists out there that ignites you, or that you with a snap of a finger you wish you could change, right? And once you identify that, think about the unique things about yourself that you can lend to society. So if you are gifted with words, and with writing, write to a legislator, write to an op-ed, right? And so before I go off on my tangent here, it kind of goes away from the gut reaction to community engagement, like, oh, I'm just going to go to an agency and volunteer there. This lends to more macro level change. So if you're gifted with youth and you can really ignite youth in your community, can you mobilize them around an issue? So once you do that, once you do all of this internal homework, right, identify what groups already exist in the communities that you're aiming to work with. So for example, I work in maternal health. So there's groups out here who have been doing work on the ground for decades, like Healthy Start, for example. And get in touch with them and see what they're working on. People can always use more hands on deck, right? When it comes to community engagement, you're addressing a larger quote unquote issue at hand, right? And we need all hands on deck. So I would say to just lend yourself to the efforts that are already being done, honor that expertise, and be willing to learn. And now we're in a new virtual reality, right? So there are new innovative ways that we can utilize technology to be engaged. And we've seen social media has been a part of that to mobilize young people in this past year. So I would say to just think outside of the box and capitalize off of this opportunity to network with people virtually, see what they need, see where you can be the best service person.
Well, thank you. You actually answered the question and part A and B in terms of, what are the first couple steps to community engagement and how does one go about identifying a cause about which they are passionate. So thank you for those three answers. And Lena, would you like to weigh in on this? How can individuals get involved in this virtual world?
Yeah, I want to take a minute and applaud a part of Morgan's answer. I think the recognition of people that have done the work forever is really the starting point. We all have great ideas. Chances are everybody has thought about those before. We might bring a different gift or a talent to what that effort is, though. So I really appreciated, Morgan, you bringing that up. It's part of how we try to respond to faculty, staff, and student interest. Is always, let's take a landscape view of what already is going on and historically where we've been. I think the other piece that I might add is really trying to talk to people that do work in arenas that you're interested in. So much of the way that we become civically involved is by getting a mentor of some kind, shape, or form. And I don't mean a formal mentor. I mean somebody that we just love and respect and does great work. And you kind of ask, how did you get started with that? Who are you working with? What are you working on right now? What's getting you really excited? And I think it's sort of, you congregate with the people who are doing the thing that you want to do. And that's a great, powerful way to start. And of course, if anybody's out there and you really feel like you're coming up blank on some of these things, get in touch with us in our office. We'd love to refer you to all different kinds of opportunities. We would talk with you about what you're interested in and passionate about.
Good. Belkis, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. I'll weigh in with my own experience. By Pittsburgh standards, I'm relatively a newbie. I arrived in Pittsburgh about 5 years ago to come and work at the University of Pittsburgh. And I've always been someone who as Morgan so beautifully stated, has sought to give back using the talents that God has given me in support of a particular community. And dear to my heart, of course, is the Latino community, because that's how I identify. And my parents are both refugees from Cuba and benefited greatly from organizations that were empowering immigrant and refugee communities. And so I did exactly what Morgan and Lena were recommending, which was, started to befriend people across the community, both in the university, in government relations, folks who were on the ground doing the work, and trying to understand a bit about the incredible breadth of work that is already being done in Pittsburgh, and trying to figure out where there was need that matched my interest and my skill set. And just to say, it takes time if you do it well. I think Morgan is really encouraging us all to really be introspective and thoughtful and careful about this. I mean, it took me about 2.5 years to find a place where I felt at home, and then that place started to offer me opportunities to try my hand at different projects that needed volunteers or that needed mentors or support. And then I realized there were some things I was really good at and other things that other people were really good at, and I should step aside and allow those folks to come forward. And so it's a fantastic opportunity when one can have those conversations and not be afraid to try something new, and know that organizations are always in need of folks, and that trying your hand at a particular project or helping out in baby steps rather than going full in might be both beneficial to you and to the organization over time. And I'm happy to say that today I'm actually the board president of that organization, and it took years of work and commitment to do that. But as Morgan is saying, it's an organization that is dear to my heart. Its vision and mission speaks to me directly. And I feel that our talents are well suited to that organization. And so it's been a blessing to do that work.
Thank you. Morgan, since it hasn't been long since you graduated from Pitt, and I understand they still owe you a formal graduation, but what was it like getting involved with your community as a Pitt student?
Yeah, so I just want to preface this by saying, a lot of us, when we learn about civic engagement and community engagement, it's been young people who have mobilized and organized. And a lot of this happened on college campuses. So pretty much my entire Pitt journey has had community engagement at its root. And I would say that it was something that was my calling, and I didn't even realize it at the time. Nearly a decade ago, when I was a freshman at Pitt, I worked on the presidential campaign for Barack Obama. And our headquarters was right on Forbes Avenue on top of Pamela's Diner. and there is where I really got to politically engage college communities around Pittsburgh for young folks to really understand their voice in the political process and engage them in issues that matter to them. So that was my first sort of experience on the political front, but also the grassroots organizing. And then after then, it just took off. I was on campus when the Black Lives Matter movement took off in 2014. And I am still to this day just so proud of how Pitt students came out to, take over the streets and yell that Black Lives Matter. And it didn't matter what department we were a part of, we were all united, right, for a common cause. And just seeing young people carrying on the spirit of the civil rights movement, because the civil rights era is still happening to this day. It did not end. But it was beautiful seeing that. And I've had professors who were organizers back in the 60s that, they saw me carrying on the fight and they were so supportive. But most recently, when I was in graduate school in the School of Social Work, my degree by nature, my whole focus was in community organizing and social action. So by nature, it was community engagement. But my first year, I was a Center on Race and Social Problems Fellow. And I'm going to be repeating what Lena and Belkis already alluded to earlier with Homewood. But I worked alongside the Homewood Children's Village, where I really got to be a mentor for students in the community. But in addition to that, it wasn't just me in the school. I was out in the Homewood community building relationships with amazing people who have been on the ground forever and created meaningful relationships with community leaders. And I really just got to understand the heart and soul of Homewood that you wouldn't see on TV, right? I mean, this is the living, breathing Homewood. And then my second year, I was literally a community engagement fellow, where I interned with State Representative Jake Wheatley. And that experience really allowed me to see, I was the point person as people came into the office to tell me what they needed and what they wanted the Hill to become. And as someone who has Hill District roots, it was just so meaningful being in that community and being present and honoring the history of that community and honoring the lived experiences of folks on the ground. So this was a really long-winded way to say that my community engagement at Pitt really organically developed. It wasn't even necessarily part of an official Pitt group. It would just happen with me getting together with my peers and saying, like, you know what, I want to see this change. Let's use our power as Pitt students and as young people to actually be the change we want to see, as we so often hear.
Well, I had a conversation with someone a few weeks ago, and they were complaining that young people today are very selfish and they don't get involved in the community and volunteer. And I was thinking, who are you around? Because I know certainly the students who, and I interact with a lot of students on Pitt's campus, and they are so involved. They are so eager to get involved with the community. And I'm sure, Belkis, you and Lena also would agree that the group today, they are very, very conscious about making this planet better and not just being, wealthy engineers or financial folks or whatever. They want to contribute something and they want to have a meaningful relationship. So that said, what's one step that someone viewing this webinar today can take to begin to get involved in their community if they've been under a rock or maybe have not been involved? How can they get started? Let's start with you, Belkis.
So, it may sound a little strange, but one of the first things I did when I arrived in Pittsburgh as someone new to the city is that I started to seek out events and activities that were hosted by organizations that shared my interests and my views. And so one of the things that I would say is, and I'll share some links here in a second, now that we're in a digital environment and we're all sort of engaging virtually, there are organizations that are hosting conversations such as this one, but also lectures and workshops and trainings that are open to the community. And that's a very sort of low stakes but high rewards method of engagement, where one can just start by participating in events and activities like these and start, as Morgan is saying, building networks and friendships that will lead to more deep and meaningful methods of engagement over time. You keep hearing me talk about things in long term, and that's because I deeply believe that when we talk about community engagement, it is something that happens slowly, respectfully, humbly, and over time. That it doesn't happen from one day to the other, and that sometimes baby steps, such as just seeking out opportunities to participate in events, conversations, workshops virtually, will allow us to, one, better understand the ethos of the organization and its leaders, and then two, understand ourselves and our place or not within a particular organization.
Thank you. Lena?
Well, so much good has been said. I think I would add one other thing. we all don't serve in the same way. So we have to get real clear on what we think our best sort of mechanism of change happens, right? What I mean by that is this. Some of us are really called to be of direct service, right? Working very much face to face on a front line. Others of us really are called to give of our treasure, right? Our money. Some of us are called to political action, and some of us are called to activism. And then some of us are even called to social entrepreneurship. We have that real great knack for bringing the private market in with the public good. But get a little clear about that, because sometimes we think that if we want to make change in community, we all have to be in direct service, or we all have to be in politics. That's not true. And you can find an organization or group of people doing just about any one of those on any issue that we're passionate about. So that's my recommendation. Really think about, how do I want to give of myself? And I guarantee you'll find a match. And again, if even after you've done that thinking, you're still looking for a foothold, a start, call me. I'm people to talk to young people all across this city through our community engagement centers about how you got to where you are. That is a method of service in and of itself, right? Just sharing of ourselves. How did we get to where we are? And so we've got lots of opportunities for that. And I'm not kidding. I would love those phone calls.
And I'm thinking, because I just recently retired, but I'm thinking about all of the people in corporate America, even CEOs, who want to be involved in the community. And they offer the various types of talents that you said, financial resources or their skills or whatever, but I'm finding more of them who are seeking intentionally to get involved with the community. So let me ask this of any of you. I'm not sure if you can answer it. How is Pitt specifically helping the African immigrant community?
Yeah, I think, Val, I want to talk a little bit more about our community engagement centers, right? It's not happenstance that the first two community engagement centers are located in historically Black and African American neighborhoods of Pittsburgh, in Homewood and the Hill District. Part of how we chose locations for those community engagement centers was looking at where we had deep roots of involvement over long periods of time. Much of that involvement goes back to our Black Action Society in the late 60s and the civic connections that were made in those two communities. It was then followed up by different faculty and schools and departments that had been working in both neighborhoods. And yet we had an interesting relationship in both neighborhoods. Interesting being a euphemism for challenging, right? As an institution, we didn't always show up the right way. And yet we still had members of those communities asking for a deeper relationship with our institution. And so I think that has been a really strong point of connection for Pitt and our African American community, our Black communities here in Pittsburgh. Where that calls us is to get much more focused in on real racial equity work, right? How do we engage for racial equity in those communities and beyond? And I think we are seeing a greater amount of attention, more recently particularly. I think we have those building blocks, but continuing to keep that in the forefront, even as we work locally, has been so important.
Thank you. Morgan, it looks like you want to say something. Did you want to add to that?
Well, I can't speak Pitt is doing on an institutional level. But again, I would say that, again, there's various organizations that are making those intentional efforts and they don't necessarily have the limelight. At my organization currently, we're tapping into the recent gender equity report that was released that we all know about. And I sit on the commission that released that report. But again, we can't lump folks into a monolithic category, right? Just because they appear Black on the surface doesn't mean that, everyone has the same lived experience. So when it comes to maternal health, for example, we're channeling into African immigrant organizations and, the that they serve and trying to honor the lived experience of those people and identify their unique needs. And I would imagine that Pitt is evolving and doing the same thing on an institutional level that Lena and Belkis are working on day to day. But it's an evolving process, but we can't have a most livable city until all of our issues as a whole are addressed and prioritized. Of course, it's not going to be night that we address it. But if we make intentional effort or those voices, then we're in the right.
Okay, I'm going to ask one final question and then open it up to the Q&A. If a person feels I want to get involved with my community, but I don't have excess time to volunteer, are there any other options or suggestions to individuals like that? Any of you?
Back the organizations that are doing the work. It is hard to get the work done if you don't have enough money to pay the rent. It is hard to get the work done if you don't have enough political support to have your message heard in politics, right? So back the organizations that are doing the work. If you yourself don't have time, figure out who you want to connect with and say, how might I make your mission accelerate? What can I give you so that you can continue on your journey?
Okay, thank you. Now we have several questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to begin with the first one. And any of you can answer this. What does engagement mean in terms of making Pittsburgh a more livable for Blacks?
I'll go ahead and offer some thoughts and then pass it over to my colleagues. You know, from my perspective, and of course, my perspective is institutionally rooted, right? I'm helping to continue the legacy of engagement here at the University of Pittsburgh. I alluded to it before, but I want to say it again. I think our engagements have to be partnered with those people and organizations that are working on racial equity. That we have to continue to look for the big purpose for why we're engaging, right? And that really tends to be addressing systemic root issues of disparity and discrimination. If we don't keep that in front of us, I think sometimes we can lose the point of engagement, right? It becomes about having more service opportunities, about being able to have more partnerships, but really the point of engagement is coming together to solve our mutual problems. So that's really where I think this is all headed. But Morgan, Belkis, I'd love for you to join me in this answer.
Yeah, and yet again, we do not have time because I could talk about this for days. But you know, at the end of the day, as much as we would love for Pittsburgh to be a most livable city and set a precedent of, you know, doing that, it's not the case. Pittsburgh is often referred to a tale of two cities because of how segregated it is, both racially, but also in thought. And we have to do a better job at breaking silos here because not only does it lend to innovation and diversity in thought and backgrounds and effort, but it's just part of how you should evolve as a human, right? And, you know, as a Black woman who lives here and who's native here, I always wonder, you know, what are the implications of me being Black and living in Pittsburgh? It doesn't matter how much money or status I have. At the end of the day, the systemic issues are going to be first and forefront, right? So it's, again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but it has to be intentional with the funding that we have in this city, the philanthropy, the research, the universities, which Pitt is actively addressing, the research, just all of the innovation that we have here. We can set the precedent for actually putting our money where our mouth is and being active about it. So as long as we are right hand in hand with the community, right? And it's just listening. Honestly, at the end of the day, just listen. Because a lot of the things that were amplified in the gender equity report, for example, weren't brand new. They weren't just pretty numbers on a paper. These were real, actual lived experiences. So the more that we can actually cross bridges in Pittsburgh and engage with one another, the more that we're going to be headed toward Pittsburgh actually being most livable.
Agreed.
And so this, thank you. And so this is a follow-up, just asking for one or two things specifically. What should Pitt be doing to engage, support, and enrich local communities of color that it is not currently doing? So if any of you can think of just maybe one or two additional things.
There's so many things, Val. And one of the things that I'd like to point to, I dropped in the chat a little while ago, is actually Pitt's recognition that it has a long way to go and commitment to doing that very difficult work in a way that is respectful and, again, transformative over time. And so this past year in particular, the university took a pause and did some really difficult but important introspective work as a university to ask ourselves, where can we get it better, and where can we do things well? Where are we getting it wrong, and what needs to happen? And so what you'll see is a commitment to a social justice initiative that has multiple branches and initiatives. Some of them acknowledge, for instance, that this challenge is an intergenerational one, right? So that we can't just leave the responsibility, though Morgan has a lot of valuable things to say about our youth and our younger generations, we can't leave that burden directly on our students or our younger populations alone. And so we are also committed to understanding and rectifying that a lot of the work that we can do is to leverage our privilege as an institution to engage in conversations, and Lena can certainly speak to this better than I can, with our government representatives at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, and that Pitt has a commitment to that. We're also committed, as Morgan has referenced, to do better when it comes to providing faculty and practitioners the resources that they need to focus on this research and to make that research available to our local community and in service of our local community. So we do have a long way to go, but I do believe that Pitt is recognizing that in a very vocal and a strategic way for the first time, at least in the short time that I've been at the institution. And I think that we're poised at the right moment for all of us to continue to ask these very important questions, and then to come to the table and have conversations about how each of us as staff, as faculty, alumni, students, can do our part as these initiatives and projects get underway.
Thank you. Would anyone like to answer this? How do you personally define success when it comes to community engagement?
I really look for indicators that, first of all, there was reciprocity in the relationship, right? I'm changed as a result of being engaged with you, that there is impact that comes from that engagement, and that it's sustainable. Sustainable doesn't mean that it's in perpetuity, but it means that what we're doing isn't sort of starting and stopping, generating energy and then backing away from it. So those are really 3 hallmarks of success for myself.
Thank you. Nicole, have a question for you. What are some projects or programs that AAAC has worked on this past year that you're really proud of?
The AAAC has worked on the Student Success Initiative, where we are looking at Black students, their graduation rates, and really evaluating that process and helping the university see how they can assist Black students to become successful and matriculate through the university. So we're really proud of that project that we did. The AAAC has 5 different affiliates in the area where alumni come together to support each other as well as to support our initiatives. We're really working on improving our scholarship fund, making sure that we are able to fund students. We also do, on the day of service, each affiliate comes together and they do some type of service event. So it's very important for us to be able to see what the university is doing and how we also can become involved, even though we may not be in the city of Pittsburgh, but in outside areas, lending a hand to our communities, because it's very important that we give back. One of our founding principles is Sankofa, which is reaching back. And so it's very important as alumni that we continue to do that because someone did that for us. So no matter where we are in globally, we still need to provide some type of community engagement. I'm trying to think what other things we're doing. We reconnected with the Black Action Society. So we're reconnecting and meeting with them on a regular basis to include them and to move them into our alumni group. So that's what pretty much we're working on and I'm happy about.
In addition to the scholarships and mentoring, individuals who receive the scholarships and other individuals, I think there's been a lot of emphasis on that, matching mentors with mentees this year.
Yes, I wanted to also mention that we are really pushing the Pitt Commons, and we've been working on getting alumni to meet with students. And so that's one of our big projects that we've been working on. And our Vice President Byron Allen is in charge of that project. So we've been doing a wonderful job in pushing that and getting training on having alumni involved and working with students and promoting them as well.
Thank you. Okay, here is a question. There's someone who just started a nonprofit out on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., incorporated this year, and they're working with a population that are immigrants. They're working with immigrant and refugee communities within D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. So they are asking if Pitt has any type of programs or if there's any type of resource guide that can direct them to organizations that they might be able to work with to help the communities, the immigrant community, not just in Pittsburgh, but outside of Pittsburgh. Any organizations that they're familiar with that Pitt alum are working with.
Yeah, I mean, one that comes to mind is ARYSE, ARYSE, that was actually started by a Pitt alum, Jenna Barron, who's doing fantastic work to meet the needs of immigrant and refugee communities here in Pittsburgh. To paraphrase Lena, contact me and I can give you more information about your particular request and information, because the University Center for International Studies, of which I'm a part, sort of works directly with organizations across Pittsburgh that service immigrant and international communities, and I would be more than happy to have that conversation. If you'd like to reach me, I'll put my contact information in the chat to continue that conversation.
Thank you. How can, someone ask, how can my fraternal organization be a strategic partner in terms of project planning within the community?
Val, could you say that one more time?
Okay. How can my fraternal organization be a strategic partner in terms of project planning with community organizations?
So one resource that you might want to check out is the Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership, that has membership of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nonprofit organizations in the greater metro area. Another is the Program to Aid Citizen Enterprise. Program to Aid Citizen Enterprise, of which I'm on the board. I can't say enough great things about our organization. It's a capacity building organization for community-based organizations that serve communities of color and are led by leaders of color. And so if you're looking, your fraternal organization can provide that kind of capacity building support, project planning. Those are two entities that I think would be very excited about working with you.
Thank you. Someone is asking, they say, I keep hearing the term place-based come up in the conversation around community engagement. Can you elaborate on what exactly that means?
Val, why don't I take this one and then, invite Morgan and Belkis to join me in this. So, there are many different kinds of communities, right? There's communities of identity, right? Communities of shared interest, communities of geography, communities of place. And typically when we talk about place-based engagement, it means that as that engagement is developing, it's taking into consideration the full context of a place in which it's happening, the social history, the political history, the systems and structures that are impacting that place, the environment, the built environment, as well as the strengths, the assets, and the partners that are in that place. And most of places that we can find have some sort of form of agenda that we're working toward. And so you become a partner in place. And that's typically what we mean by place building, at least in the work that I've been doing.
And so one example of that is actually going to be reflected in a conference that Pitt will be hosting next week, which is actually the international, sponsored by the International Place-Based University Network, right? And so this is a conference around answering this issue as regards the role of the university within its own place and environment, but more importantly, how university partners can learn from each other's history given their relationships with their community in place. So for instance, the University of Pittsburgh has long roots and partnerships with Newcastle University in the UK. That is a university that's deeply rooted in its place and its commitment to civic duty and responsibility. And so University of Pittsburgh has been learning a lot about what it means to be responsible for the place that we inhabit in the community that that we share, based on the research and the partnership and the relationship that we have with Newcastle University. They in turn, and because the University of Pittsburgh and Newcastle have this friendship, now our city mayors are having these really fantastic conversations with one another about the role of the university in its research enterprise, helping the city with its own mission and vision for its future in different ways. In both cases, the conversation is around the history of both Pittsburgh and Newcastle in its urban renewal, both cities that were considered rest cities at some point and that have evolved into cities that are focusing more heavily on education, research, medicine, and sort of sharing our interests in learning from each other as we advance in creating more sustainable and livable communities. Right, so that's just one example, and I'll throw some information in the chat about that. Thanks, Lena. So if you're interested, this conference is open to all. So if you're interested in learning more, it's happening next Thursday and next Friday. And the link that Lena has provided gives you more information and the possibility to register.
Thanks so much. It is now 7:57. As I said in the beginning, we probably could continue until 10 o'clock, but that's not possible. But please do expect an email with the various resources that the panelists have been recommending throughout. I want to thank our panelists this evening for joining us. It was very important to AAAC that we did something that involved the community. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. This is one of my passions. In fact, I retired 2 years ago. I just had a big birthday, and when my 9-year-old grandson was asked, well, what do you think about your grandmother? He said, well, in addition to he likes the fact that I take him on vacation and everything, he says, I really like the fact that she's retired and she's still making money. So what he thinks is that he thinks I'm getting paid for all of my community involvement. All he knows is that I'm very involved in the community and I'm busy regardless of COVID. So again, I really thank you, Morgan. I told Morgan I was the president of her fan club and she didn't even know me, but I knew everything about her. And also Lena and Belkis, thank you for all that you're doing for the university and for the community. Nicole?
Yes, I want to thank all the panelists that attended today and shared all this wonderful information, new information about how to be involved in our communities, how to make a difference, and how, about the different skill sets that you may have. It doesn't have to be direct. It could be many different ways that you are involved in your community. And we want to continue to encourage our alumni to stay involved. It's very important that you do that. I think it's definitely part of your civic responsibility at some point in time in your life is to be involved in your community, to lift them up to greater heights. I want to also, I know people have asked how you get involved in AAAC. You can also contact the Alumni Association. They will put you on our mailing list. We do have a Gmail account that you can send a message and we can make sure you get connected to one of our affiliates if you're not in the Pittsburgh area. We also will be having a general body meeting coming up in February, as well as we're going to have a movie night where we're releasing one of our documentaries that we have 2 documentaries that AAAC created, and so we'll be sharing that information with everyone as well. And we just want to thank you for your participation on this Friday night. And if you have You can go to the Day of Service website. There's different service events that you can get involved for Monday, just to put your little foot in there and see how you can get involved. So thank you so very much to everyone on the call, Lena, Morgan, and Belkis, and Val. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you to the Alumni Association for providing this platform for us to be able to connect. And thank you, AAAC, for continuing to support our endeavors. You have a wonderful evening and weekend.
Good night.
Good night.